By Mrs. Schaake, Human Rights and Technology in Third Countries. 4 minutes for the rapporteur, first of all. You have the floor, madam.
Yes, it's working. Technology is a great thing. Thank you, President, Vice President Timmermans, colleagues, and in particular the shadow rapporteurs. I enjoyed our discussions and cooperation on this report on human rights and technology, so thank you very much. And in addition, I would like to thank the people from all over the world who have shared their input and suggestions. Many did so online, and they have made the draft text that we have voted on in the Foreign Affairs Committee and will vote on tomorrow in this House a lot stronger. I think crowdsourcing works. Technological developments have major impact on human rights, both to advance them and to restrict them. They can advance access to information, freedom of expression and association, but also the documentation and sharing of human rights abuses or uncovering of corruption have benefited from mobile phones and access to the open internet for more people. Disaster relief, aid efforts, election monitoring, they increasingly rely on technologies to help emancipate and empower people. However, technological systems can be and are also misused as tools for human rights violations through censorship, mass surveillance, tracking and tracing of individuals, unauthorized access to devices, jamming, interception, and a lot more. So besides technological specifications, the context in which ICTs are used determine to a great extent whether these tools advance or violate human rights. What country, which user or buyer, and what legal safeguards or democratic oversight are in place. These these contextual aspects should be assessed carefully in EU policies. More transparency and accountability in the market of the most intrusive and damaging technologies is key, both for security and for human rights. And this is too often presented as a false dichotomy between security and freedom, or actually justifying restrictions in people's rights and freedoms in the name of advancing security, when in fact they should reinforce each other, and at least EU-made systems should not be sold in an unrestricted market. Without smart policies, proliferation of these systems is inevitable. And in fact, I'm sure that we here in the EU institutions, the European External Action Service, struggle to protect our own people, our own diplomats, and our own information from the very same systems that we are discussing here. Intelligence services, criminal networks, hackers with bad intentions, all can buy and use intrusive technologies that are made in Europe. And the credibility of Europe's foreign policy is undermined directly when an Italian company unjustly gets a license to sell to Sudan or Russia, or when a French company sells digital keys to open any door, even the ones we may think are protected or locked by passwords or much stronger measures. But much worse, human rights defenders in Mexico, Azerbaijan, Colombia, Egypt, Turkey, Iran or Russia should be protected by EU policies and not harmed with the help of EU-made technologies. So concluding, EU policy should mainstream human rights in the way that technologies are designed and used, and it should streamline the role of technologies throughout all human rights policies. And this report presents many concrete ideas. One of the strong recommendations is that there should not be a ban on encryption technologies or requirements to hand over the keys. Instead, we, through our EU policy, should train and equip journalists, human rights defenders and others facing repression and violations with the knowledge and the tools to protect themselves and their communications. Europe has the opportunity and should have the ambition to be a global leader in ensuring technologies benefit human rights. And of course, this is only possible if we lead by example. Thank you.
And thank you, Madam. We now move to Catch the Eye. And colleagues, I'm going to announce now that I will take 5 Catch the Eye speakers in each of these reports to be fair to all of the rapporteurs. So I give the floor for 1 minute to Mr. Polchak, and to emphasise that colleagues who have spoken in previous debates may not always be called in Catch the Eye in the subsequent debate. But I will try and be as fair as I possibly can. So the floor is yours for 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Já bych chtěl poděkovat za...
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for submitting this report, which in my opinion is very important, and it goes right to the point. That is, the question is, for how much money are we willing to sell our conscience? For how much money are the companies willing to sell their conscience? That is, for example, companies that do activities which would be unthinkable in the Czech Republic or in the EU in general. The report deals with the issue how much you can transfer human rights into other countries, and I believe that we should hold very strong debate on this. In my opinion, there are many basic human rights that are universal human rights, and these rights present such a value that goes above values such as employment or GDP. However, not the entire world shares this opinion with us, and we should try to find the border in many cases. Thank you, the rapporteur, for dealing with this important issue.
Thank you. And now for 1 minute, please, Mr. Caputo.
Thank you very much. The proposal reveals the risks as far as violation of human rights which come from the use of new types of technologies, particularly through the internet. This grows all the more so with the violation of the various ethics that go along with these types of activities on the internet, a high risk of use of these new technologies for surveillance purposes. So ex post controls are absolutely necessary in order to protect human rights. Even if there's noble use of these technologies, once again there has to be very great care to protect the ever so vulnerable who use these technologies. So here we have to take into consideration all aspects of use of these technologies, particularly as they concern, as related to investigation, surveillance, and so on and so forth. So governments, civil society, and private entities have to all be involved in this effort.
Mr. Jakovic, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to congratulate Mrs. Schaake for this report. Right away, I would like to say that the Internet has, of course, opened big new areas of freedom. However, this reminds me of Alfred Nobel, who invented the dynamite, believing it will serve peace purposes. However, later on, it was used in wars, as we know. The situation is similar with the Internet. It opened up new areas for freedom, but also opportunities for abuse, in particular by dictatorship regimes. As we know, the European Union has trade with them and has some lucrative deals. And this is why it is good that this report warns of any potential for abuse in the future. And I believe that the Commission will use this report in its future work as well.
Mrs. Hautala, please, for 1 minute.
President, Vice President of the Commission, there's no doubt that ICT is a human rights issue. It's both and. It's both an advantage for people to communicate and spread knowledge of human rights violations, but it's also become a bit of a trap for people who defend human rights. And Mrs. Schaake has produced an excellent report, which we have to defend in the vote. I think we should be ready to recognize that the complicity of some enterprises, also from the EU area, has greatly damaged our reputation by creating serious human rights violations in Iran, in Uzbekistan, in Belarus and other countries, and I'm talking about some telecommunications providers such as Telia, Sonera, Nokia, Siemens. And I think we also have to defend the point in the report which says that the service providers and the network providers should publish reports about their connections between themselves and oppressive regimes. We have to also to protect whistleblowers.
Thank you. Mr. Arnott, 1 minute, please.
There's actually quite a lot of good stuff in this report. I do believe that we must take great care to avoid unnecessary censorship, particularly of the internet, although I personally believe that is best achieved through national governments rather than through EU diktat. But I would like to draw your attention to paragraph 17 of the report. This paragraph is all about the politicisation of trade. It's about imposing our Western values upon third countries as a condition of trade with developing nations. To me, this is not only unacceptable, but it's also supremely arrogant, because it assumes that we know better than developing countries what their laws should be, that we can tell them what they ought to be doing. It's riding roughshod over their own sovereignty, and I can't support a report which contains that phrasing.